Have you ever been told you're not good enough by the person who was supposed to believe in you the most? Today, I want to share a story that will touch your heart and maybe even change the way you see family relationships forever. This is about a father's cruel words, a daughter's incredible journey, and how sometimes life has the most beautiful way of proving us wrong. Hi, beautiful souls. I'm Tina, and I'm so grateful you're here with me today. You know, every week I share stories that remind us of the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the amazing strength we all have inside us. Today's story is particularly close to my heart because it shows us that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up learning the biggest lessons. I promise you, if you stay until the end, you'll witness one of the most incredible transformations I've ever shared. So please, grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if stories like these touch your soul the way they touch mine. Sarah Martinez was 22 when her father, Robert Martinez, spoke the words that would echo in her mind for the next 15 years. She had just graduated from community college with an associate degree in graphic design, her portfolio tucked under her arm like a precious treasure. Her eyes sparkled with dreams of creating beautiful advertisements, designing websites, and maybe even starting her own creative agency someday. But when she walked into her childhood, home in Phoenix, Arizona, expecting celebration and support, she found something entirely different waiting for her. Robert sat in his leather recliner, the same chair he'd occupied every evening for as long as Sarah could remember, watching the evening news with a beer in his hand. He was a construction foreman, a man who believed in hard work, concrete results, and traditional paths to success. When Sarah approached him with her diploma and a bright smile, hoping to share her excitement about the job interviews she had lined up, his response shattered her world into a million pieces. Graphic design? Robert scoffed, not even looking away from the television screen. Sarah, you need to get your head out of the clouds and face reality. This art stuff isn't a real career. It's a hobby for rich kids who don't need to worry about paying bills. You're wasting your time with these childish fantasies. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. You know what you are? You're a failure. You're 22 years old, living in my house with no real skills and no real future. I'm embarrassed to tell people what my daughter does for a living because, frankly, you don't do anything worthwhile. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She stood there, diploma trembling in her hands, feeling smaller and smaller with each cruel syllable. Her mother, Linda, sat silently at the kitchen table, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice trapped by years of avoiding confrontation with her husband. Sarah had always been the creative one in the family, the dreamer who saw beauty where others saw ordinary things. She had spent countless hours as a child, drawing, painting, and creating little masterpieces that her teachers praised, but her father dismissed as silly doodles. "Dad, I have 3 job interviews next week," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her breaking heart. The portfolio review went really well, and Professor Johnson said I have real talent. She thinks I could even freelance while I build my client base. Robert laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound that contained no joy. Talent? Sarah, talent doesn't pay the rent. Talent doesn't put food on the table. You want to know what talent gets you? It gets you 30 years old, still living with your parents, wondering where your life went wrong. Look at your cousin Mike. He's a plumber, makes good money, owns his house, has a family. That's success. What you're doing is just postponing the inevitable moment when you'll have to grow up and get a real job. That night, Sarah packed her few belongings into 2 suitcases and left her childhood home. She had saved some money from her part-time job at a local coffee shop, enough for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment across town. As she walked out the front door, her father's final words followed her into the night. Don't come crawling back when this foolish dream of yours falls apart. I won't say I told you so, but we'll both know I was right. The studio apartment was smaller than her childhood bedroom, with a kitchenette that barely qualified as a kitchen and a bathroom so tiny she had to step into the shower to close the door. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, Sarah was completely on her own, with nothing but her talent, her determination, and a burning desire to prove her father wrong. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and the heater barely worked. But every morning when she woke up in that little space, she felt something she had never experienced before: freedom. Sarah's first job was with a small marketing firm that specialized in local businesses. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover her rent and expenses, but she threw herself into every project with the passion of someone who had something to prove. She designed flyers for neighborhood restaurants, created logos for startup companies, and built websites for small retailers. Her colleagues noticed her dedication immediately. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, constantly learning new software, studying design trends, and pushing herself to improve. Within 6 months, Sarah had become the go-to designer for the firm's most challenging projects. Her supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, was a seasoned marketing professional who had worked with dozens of designers over her 15-year career. She saw something special in Sarah, a combination of raw talent and relentless work ethic that was rare in someone so young. Jennifer became more than a boss. She became a mentor, teaching Sarah about client relations, project management, and the business side of creative work. During their weekly one-on-ones, Jennifer would share stories from her own career, the mistakes she'd made early on, and the lessons that had shaped her into the professional she was today. Sarah absorbed every word like a sponge, grateful to have someone who actually believed in her potential and invested time in developing it. The mentorship filled a void Sarah hadn't even realized existed, providing the encouragement and guidance she had always craved but never received at home. "Sarah, you have something most designers never develop," Jennifer told her one Friday afternoon as they wrapped up a particularly successful campaign for a local restaurant chain. The campaign had increased the client's foot traffic by 30% in just 2 months, and the restaurant owner had personally called to thank them. Sarah's designs hadn't just been visually striking. They had told a story that resonated with customers, creating an emotional connection that translated directly into business results. You don't just make things look pretty. You understand how design can solve problems, how it can make a business more successful. That's the difference between an artist and a designer. You're definitely a designer. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at those words, a validation she had craved for so long but had never received from the person whose opinion mattered most. For the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself to feel genuinely proud of what she was building. But the praise at work couldn't completely heal the wound left by her father's rejection. Sarah carried those harsh words with her like stones in her pocket, heavy reminders of the person who was supposed to love her unconditionally, but instead had chosen to tear her down. Some nights, lying in her small apartment, she would replay that final conversation with her father, analyzing every word, wondering if there had been something she could have said or done differently. The hurt would wash over her in waves, especially during moments of triumph when she most wanted to share her success with family. She would catch herself reaching for her phone to call home with exciting news, only to remember the bitter reality that her father didn't want to hear about her accomplishments. She didn't call home, didn't send updates about her successes, didn't share the small victories that were building into something bigger. In her mind, she had been disowned, cast out from the family that was supposed to support her dreams. Meanwhile, Robert Martinez continued his life as if nothing had changed. He went to work every day, came home to his recliner and his beer, and told himself he had done the right thing. When neighbors asked about Sarah, he gave vague responses about her figuring things out or learning some hard lessons. Deep down, he expected her to return within a few months, ready to admit he had been right and willing to pursue something more practical like nursing or teaching. He imagined the conversation they would have when she finally came crawling back, humbled by the harsh realities of trying to make it as an artist in the real world. But months turned into a year, and still no word from Sarah. Linda tried to convince her husband to reach out, to at least check if their daughter was okay, but Robert's pride wouldn't allow it. "She made her choice," he would say whenever Linda brought up their daughter. "If she wants to be stubborn and chase impossible dreams, That's her decision, but I'm not going to pretend I support it. What he didn't tell Linda was how often he found himself wondering what Sarah was doing, whether she was safe, whether she had found work, whether she was eating regularly. These thoughts would creep in during quiet moments, but he would quickly push them away, reminding himself that tough love was sometimes necessary. As Sarah's second year in the workforce began, bigger opportunities started knocking. A major advertising agency in downtown Phoenix had noticed her work on several local campaigns. They offered her a position as a junior designer with a significant salary increase and the chance to work on regional and national accounts. The interview process was intense, with multiple rounds and a comprehensive portfolio review. But Sarah's reputation for creativity and reliability had preceded her. The creative director had specifically mentioned seeing her restaurant campaign and being impressed by her ability to balance artistic vision with measurable business results. The day she got the call offering her the position, Sarah sat in her little studio apartment and cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of vindication, of progress, of dreams slowly becoming reality. She was 24 years old, had her own place, a career that was taking off, and for the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt like maybe she was going to be okay. More than okay, actually. She was going to be successful. The salary would allow her to move to a better apartment, maybe even start saving money for the future she was building entirely on her own terms. At the new agency, Sarah's talents flourished in ways she had never imagined. She worked on campaigns for major retail chains, designed marketing materials for Fortune 500 companies, and even contributed to a television commercial that aired during prime time. Her colleagues respected her opinion. Clients specifically requested her for their projects, and her portfolio grew thicker with each passing month. The creative director began inviting her to client meetings, recognizing that her insights were valuable not just in execution, but in strategy as well. You know what touches me most about Sarah's story so far? It's her incredible strength to keep going when the person who should have believed in her most chose to tear her down instead. How many of us have faced moments like this when someone we love tells us we're not good enough? But Sarah's story is just getting started, and I promise you, what happens next will absolutely amaze you. If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong about your dreams? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire the content I share here. You're not just viewers to me, you're family, and I love hearing about your journeys too. By her third year at the agency, Sarah had been promoted twice and was now leading her own team of junior designers. At 25, she was the youngest senior designer in the company's history, managing campaigns with budgets that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Her apartment had been upgraded to a beautiful one-bedroom with large windows that flooded her workspace with natural light, and she had even started saving money for a down payment on a house. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal too. The quiet, uncertain young woman who had left her father's house had evolved into a confident, articulate professional who commanded respect in meeting rooms filled with executives twice her age. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts, to speak up when she had ideas, and to stand behind her creative decisions with the kind of conviction that only comes from proven success. Her work began attracting attention beyond Phoenix. A campaign she had designed for a local tourism board caught the eye of a national travel magazine, which featured it in an article about innovative regional marketing. The exposure led to inquiries from agencies in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, all interested in recruiting the young designer who was making waves in the Southwest. But the recognition that would change everything came from an unexpected source. Sarah had been commissioned to design the visual identity for Phoenix's annual Arts Festival, a prestigious project that would put her work in front of hundreds of thousands of people over the course of a weekend. The festival's board of directors had specifically requested her after seeing her previous work for cultural events in the city. The project was massive in scope, everything from the festival's logo and signage to merchandise designs, program layouts, and digital marketing materials. Sarah assembled a team of 4 junior designers and threw herself into the project with the kind of passion that had driven her since leaving her father's house. She spent weeks researching the history of Phoenix's arts community, interviewing local artists, and developing a visual language that would capture the spirit of creativity and innovation that defined the city's cultural scene. The result was stunning. Sarah's design featured bold, vibrant colors that reflected the Arizona sunset, typography that was both modern and timeless, and imagery that celebrated the diversity of artistic expression. When the festival materials were unveiled, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Local news stations featured stories about the design. Art bloggers wrote lengthy posts analyzing the creative choices, and social media buzzed with praise for the visual identity. But the moment that would change Sarah's relationship with her father forever happened on a Saturday morning during the festival's opening weekend. Robert Martinez was having coffee at his usual diner when he overheard a conversation at the next table that made him stop mid-bite of his breakfast. "Have you seen the design work for the arts festival this year?" one woman was saying to her companion. "It's absolutely incredible. The designer is this young woman named Sarah Martinez, and she's apparently from right here in Phoenix." The newspaper article said she's only 25 and already running her own team at one of the biggest agencies in the city. Robert's fork clattered against his plate. Sarah Martinez. His Sarah. His daughter, the one he had called a failure, the one he had dismissed as a dreamer with no future. The woman at the next table continued talking, describing how the festival design had been featured in national publications and how several major companies were trying to recruit the talented young designer who had created it. After breakfast, Robert drove straight to the arts festival. The streets were packed with people, families walking around with programs and merchandise that bore his daughter's distinctive design. Everywhere he looked, he saw Sarah's work. Banners hanging from light poles, signs directing people to various exhibits, volunteers wearing T-shirts with her logo. The entire visual landscape of the festival was a testament to his daughter's talent and creativity. Robert found himself standing in front of a large information booth where festival programs were displayed. He picked one up with trembling hands, studying the sophisticated layout and beautiful typography. Inside the program, there was a feature article about the design team, with a large photo of Sarah smiling confidently next to examples of her work. The article described her as one of the Southwest's most promising young designers and detailed her rapid rise in the Phoenix creative community. For the first time in 3 years, Robert truly saw his daughter. Not the uncertain 22-year-old who had left his house with a diploma and a dream, but the accomplished professional she had become. The evidence of her success was literally surrounding him, displayed for the entire city to see and admire. Thousands of people were experiencing the arts festival through the lens of Sarah's creative vision, and the response was universally positive. That night, Robert sat in his recliner, but instead of watching television, he stared at the festival program spread open on his lap. He read the article about Sarah over and over, studying the photo of her confident smile and trying to reconcile this successful young woman with the daughter he had so cruelly dismissed. Linda found him there hours later, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The weight of his realization was crushing. Robert had spent 3 years telling himself he had been right to discourage Sarah, that he had saved her from inevitable disappointment and failure. But here was undeniable proof that she had not only succeeded, but had done so spectacularly, without his support, without his encouragement, and despite his hurtful words. The festival program became a mirror reflecting his own failures as a father, his inability to see his daughter's potential, and his stubborn refusal to believe in her dreams. His hands trembled as he traced the elegant typography bearing her name, each letter a testament to the talent he had so callously dismissed. The irony wasn't lost on him that the very creativity he had once called worthless scribbling was now being celebrated by thousands of people who had never met Sarah but could recognize her artistic vision. Linda had been watching her husband process this revelation for days, seeing the change in his demeanor from defensive pride to genuine remorse. She had never stopped missing. Their daughter had never stopped hoping that Robert would come to his senses and reach out. Now, finally, she saw the cracks forming in the wall of stubbornness he had built around his heart. She watched as he would pause during dinner, fork halfway to his mouth, lost in thoughts that seemed to physically pain him. The man who had always been so certain, so quick to judge, now questioned everything he had said and done. "Robert," Linda said gently one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, "maybe it's time to call her. Maybe it's time to tell her you were wrong." For a man who had spent his entire life believing that admitting mistakes was a sign of weakness, the thought of calling Sarah and apologizing was terrifying. How do you apologize for 3 years of silence? How do you take back words that cut so deep they drove your own child away from home? How do you rebuild a relationship when your last conversation was filled with such cruelty and dismissal? The very phrases he had used echoed in his memory like accusations. "You'll never make it as an artist. Stop wasting your time with this nonsense. Real careers require real skills." Each word now felt like a dagger he had willingly plunged into his daughter's dreams. But Robert's love for his daughter, buried under years of pride and stubbornness, was finally stronger than his fear of being vulnerable. He spent days crafting what he wanted to say, writing and rewriting his thoughts on scraps of paper, practicing. Conversations in his head during his lunch breaks at work. He knew he had only one chance to get this right, one opportunity to begin healing the damage he had caused. Meanwhile, Sarah's career continued its upward trajectory. The success of the Arts Festival design had led to 3 major contract offers, including one from a prestigious agency in Los Angeles that specialized in entertainment marketing. The offer was tempting: a significant salary increase, the opportunity to work on campaigns for major movie studios and record labels, and the chance to establish herself in one of the country's most competitive creative markets. But Phoenix had become home in a way Sarah had never expected. She had built a life there, developed professional relationships that went beyond mere networking, and found a creative community that supported and challenged her. The idea of starting over in a new city, even for a dream job, felt less appealing than continuing to grow the career she had built from nothing in her hometown. Instead of accepting the Los Angeles offer, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. She decided to start her own agency. The financial risk was enormous, but she had been saving diligently, had a portfolio of successful work, and most importantly, had developed relationships with clients who trusted her creative vision. Several of her colleagues at the agency expressed interest in joining her venture, bringing their own skills and client relationships to the new company. The day Sarah submitted her resignation letter and announced the launch of Martinez Creative Solutions was both terrifying and exhilarating. She was 26 years old, about to become a business owner, taking the biggest financial and professional risk of her life. But she was also more confident in her abilities than ever before, backed by a track record of success and driven by the same determination that had carried her through those first difficult years on her own. The launch of her agency was covered in the local business journal, with a full-page article about the young entrepreneur who was shaking up Phoenix's creative landscape. The article detailed Sarah's rapid rise from community college graduate to agency owner, highlighting her innovative approach to design and her commitment to supporting local businesses and cultural organizations. It was this article that finally gave Robert the courage to pick up the phone. Seeing his daughter's success documented in such official terms, reading about her business acumen and creative vision in the same publication that covered major corporate developments, made him realize that his window for making things right was closing. Sarah was becoming more successful and more established with each passing month, building a life that didn't include him or need his approval. But even more importantly, Robert realized that his silence wasn't just hurting him, it was depriving him of the opportunity to know the remarkable woman his daughter had become. He had missed 3 years of her life, 3 years of achievements and growth and transformation. He had chosen pride over love, stubbornness over family, and the cost of that choice was becoming clearer every day. The phone call would have to wait just a little longer, though, because Sarah's success was about to reach an even higher level, one that would make it impossible for anyone in Phoenix, including her father, to ignore the magnitude of her achievements and the complete wrongness of his original assessment of her potential. 6 months after launching Martinez Creative Solutions, Sarah received a call that would elevate her career to heights she had never dared imagine. The call came from Rebecca Chen, the creative director of a major national retail chain based in Dallas. The company was planning a complete rebranding initiative, a multi-million-dollar campaign that would touch everything from their logo and store design to their advertising and digital presence. "Sarah, we've been following your work for over a year now," Rebecca explained during their initial phone conversation. "The Arts Festival campaign caught our attention, but it's your consistent track record of innovative solutions and flawless execution that made us reach out. We're looking for an agency that can think big, but still pay attention to the smallest details. From everything we've seen, that's exactly what you do." The key project was enormous in scope and budget, the kind of contract that could establish Sarah's agency as a major player in the regional market and potentially open doors to national clients. But it was also a massive responsibility. The retail chain had over 200 locations across the Southwest, employed thousands of people, and was trusting a relatively new agency with their entire visual identity. Sarah spent 2 weeks preparing for the presentation, assembling a team of her best designers and strategists, researching every aspect of the client's business model and target demographic. She knew this was more than just another project. It was validation of everything she had built, proof that her decision to start her own agency had been the right one. The presentation took place in a sleek conference room at the client's Phoenix regional office. Sarah stood before a panel of executives, her portfolio displayed on a large screen behind her, and delivered the most important pitch of her career. She outlined her vision for the rebrand, explained her strategic approach to reaching different customer segments, and presented initial design concepts that perfectly captured what the company wanted to communicate to their customers. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The executives were impressed not only by Sarah's creative vision, but by her professional demeanor, her deep understanding of their business challenges, and her ability to translate complex marketing strategies into clear, compelling design solutions. By the end of the meeting, they had awarded her agency the contract, representing the largest single project in Sarah's career and more revenue than her agency had generated in its first 6 months combined. The news of the contract spread quickly through Phoenix's business community. Local newspapers ran stories about the young entrepreneur who had landed a major national client, and industry publications featured Sarah in articles about rising talent in the Southwest creative scene. Her agency's phone started ringing with inquiries from other potential clients who wanted to work with the designer everyone was talking about. But the moment that would finally bridge the 3-year gap between Sarah and her father came when Robert was having lunch with his construction crew at a popular restaurant near one of their job sites. The restaurant was part of the retail chain that had just hired Sarah, and the walls were covered with framed newspaper articles about local businesses and community achievements. There, prominently displayed near their table, was an article about Sarah's contract win, complete with a professional photo and a detailed description of her agency's rapid growth. Robert's coworker, Jimmy, noticed him staring at the article and followed his gaze. "Hey, that's pretty cool," Jimmy said, reading the headline. "This designer, Sarah Martinez, just landed some huge contract. Says here she's from Phoenix. Started her own company when she was barely 26. That takes guts, you know? Good for her." "Yeah," Robert managed to say, his voice barely audible. "Good for her." But Jimmy wasn't done reading. "Martinez, hey, isn't that your last name, Bob? Any relation?" The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Robert looked at the photo of his daughter, confident and professional in her business attire, surrounded by examples of her award-winning work. He thought about all the times over the past 3 years when he could have picked up the phone, all the opportunities he had missed to be part of her journey, all the pride he could have felt if he had just been brave enough to admit he was wrong. "She's my daughter," he said quietly, and for the first time in 3 years, he said it with genuine pride instead of shame or deflection. Friends, I have to pause here for a moment because Sarah's story is touching something deep in my heart, and I hope it's doing the same for you. How many of us have family members who couldn't see our potential? How many of us have had to prove ourselves to the very people who should have believed in us from the beginning? But here's what I love about this story. It's not over yet. The most beautiful part is still coming, and I promise you, you won't want to miss it. Please, if this story is moving you, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments about a time when you had to believe in yourself when others didn't. Your stories matter to me, and they matter to everyone else who watches this channel. We're building a community of people who understand that sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest struggles. Stay with me, because what happens next will restore your faith in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Jimmy's simple question had opened a floodgate that Robert couldn't close. For the rest of that lunch, he found himself talking about Sarah for the first time in 3 years, not with shame or defensive explanations, but with genuine pride. He told his co-workers about her artistic talents as a child, about the drawings she used to make that covered their refrigerator, about the way she could see beauty and possibility in things that looked ordinary to everyone else. "You must be so proud of her," Jimmy said as they prepared to head back to the job site. "Starting her own business at 26, landing contracts like this. That's incredible." "I am proud of her," Robert replied, and as he said the words, he realized they were completely true. Somewhere along the way, buried under years of stubbornness and misguided attempts to protect her from disappointment, he had never stopped loving his daughter or wanting her to succeed. He had just been too afraid and too proud to admit he had been wrong about her potential. That evening, Robert finally made the phone call he had been rehearsing for months. He sat in his kitchen, Linda beside him for moral support, with the newspaper article about Sarah's contract spread out on the table in front of him. His hands shook as he dialed the number he had gotten from directory assistants, not even sure if it was still current or if Sarah would take a call from him after 3 years of silence. The phone rang 4 times before Sarah answered, and when she did, her voice was cautious and surprised. "Dad?" "Sarah," Robert said, his voice breaking on her name. "Sarah, I saw the article in the paper about your contract, about your agency. I wanted to call and tell you. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and Robert could hear his daughter breathing, could imagine her trying to process this unexpected call and these unexpected words. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, guarded in a way that broke his heart because he knew he was the one who had taught her to be cautious with him. "Proud?" Sarah asked quietly. 3 years ago, you told me I was a failure. You said you were embarrassed to tell people what I did for a living." "I know," Robert said, tears streaming down his face as he confronted the full weight of his cruelty. "I know what I said, and I know how much I hurt you. Sarah, I was wrong. I was so completely, terribly wrong about everything. You're not a failure. You're amazing. You're successful and talented and everything I should have seen from the beginning." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, there was a tremor in her voice that suggested she was fighting back tears of her own. "Do you know what it was like, Dad? Do you know what it was like to have the person who was supposed to believe in me most tell me I was worthless? Do you know how many times I almost gave up because I could hear your voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough?" "I'm sorry," Robert whispered, the words feeling both inadequate and necessary. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but all I did was try to take away your dreams. I was scared you'd get hurt, and instead, I was the one who hurt you most." The conversation lasted for over an hour, with Sarah cautiously sharing some of the highlights of the past 3 years, while Robert listened with growing amazement and regret. She told him about the late nights building her portfolio, the early clients who took chances on her, the mentors who had provided the encouragement he should have given. She described the moment she signed the lease on her first office space, the pride she felt when she hired her first employees, and the validation that came with each successful project. "I kept thinking about what you said," Sarah admitted toward the end of their call. about how I'd come crawling back when my dreams fell apart. There were some really hard moments, especially in the beginning when I wondered if maybe you were right. But then I'd remember how much I loved design, how much joy it brought me to create something beautiful and functional, and I'd keep going. I'm glad you kept going, Robert said. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. I'm glad you were stronger than my doubts. When they finally hung up, both father and daughter were emotionally drained but hopeful. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much time had passed and too much hurt had accumulated for that. But it was a beginning, the first step toward rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged by pride and misunderstanding. Over the following weeks, Robert found himself talking about Sarah constantly. At work, he showed his coworkers the newspaper articles about her success. At the diner, he mentioned to the waitresses that the talented designer everyone was talking about was his daughter. When neighbors asked about Sarah, instead of giving vague, defensive responses, he proudly shared updates about her agency's growth and her latest projects. The transformation in Robert was remarkable to witness. The man who had once been too embarrassed to discuss his daughter's career was now actively seeking opportunities to boast about her achievements. He subscribed to design magazines so he could better understand her work, researched her agency online to read client testimonials, and even attended a business networking event where Sarah was speaking just to see her in her professional element. His weathered hands would tremble slightly as he turned the glossy pages of creative publications, trying to absorb the technical language that had once seemed foreign and frivolous to him. When co-workers at the construction site asked what he was reading during lunch breaks, Robert would beam with pride as he explained the intricacies of brand identity and visual storytelling, concepts he was learning specifically so he could better appreciate his daughter's expertise. Sarah, meanwhile, was navigating her own complex emotions about her father's sudden change of heart. Part of her was relieved and grateful that he finally recognized her success, but another part struggled with resentment about the years of support she had missed and the pain she had endured. Rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, but she was willing to try, especially when she saw the genuine remorse in her father's efforts to make amends. Late at night, when her apartment was quiet and the weight of her complicated feelings pressed heaviest, Sarah would find herself alternating between tears of gratitude and waves of anger at all the validation she had craved for so long but received too late. The real test came when Sarah's agency was featured in a major business magazine as one of the top 10 rising creative agencies in the Southwest. The article included a 2-page spread about Sarah's journey, complete with photos of her office, examples of her work, and quotes from satisfied clients. When Robert saw the magazine at his local bookstore, he bought 5 copies and spent the next week showing them to anyone who would look. His eyes would light up as he pointed to Sarah's photograph, his voice growing louder with excitement as he read her quotes aloud to strangers in grocery store checkout lines, his chest swelling with a pride so intense it seemed to physically transform his posture. At the construction company where Robert worked, his constant talk about Sarah's success had become legendary among his co-workers. Men who had known him for decades were amazed by the transformation from a father who never mentioned his daughter to someone who couldn't stop bragging about her accomplishments. Jimmy, the co-worker who had first asked about Sarah at the restaurant, finally pulled Robert aside one day. The two men stood beside a concrete mixer, dust settling on their hard hats as Jimmy struggled to find the right words for a conversation that had been building for months. "Bob, I've got to ask you something," Jimmy said during their lunch break. "You talk about Sarah constantly now, and that's great, but I'm curious. 3 years ago, when guys would ask about your kids, you never mentioned her. What changed?" His tone was gentle but direct, the kind of honesty that comes from years of working side by side with someone and witnessing their complete transformation. Robert was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain the complexity of his realization and transformation. "I was ashamed," he said finally. "Not of her, but of myself. I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong about her dreams, too stubborn to see that she was succeeding exactly the way she said she would. So instead of celebrating her, I pretended she didn't exist. It was easier than admitting I'd failed as a father." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, the weight of his confession settling between them like concrete dust in the air. "And now," Jimmy asked, "now I tell everyone because I'm proud of who she is, but also because I'm trying to make up for all the times I should have been bragging about her and wasn't. Every person I tell about Sarah's success is a small way of apologizing for the years I wasted being too foolish to see how special she was." The conversation with Jimmy helped Robert understand something important about his own motivation. He wasn't just proud of Sarah's current success. He was trying to retroactively provide the support and recognition he should have given her from the beginning. Every article he shared, every story he told, every boastful comment to neighbors and co-workers was his way of making up for the encouragement he had failed to provide when she needed it most. Sarah began to see this pattern in her father's behavior during their increasingly frequent phone calls. Robert would mention conversations he'd had with people about her work, and she realized he was actively seeking opportunities to celebrate her achievements publicly. It was touching and a little overwhelming to imagine her formerly critical father becoming her biggest advocate. The relationship between Sarah and Robert would never be exactly what it might have been if he had supported her from the beginning, but it evolved into something different and perhaps even stronger. Sarah's success had taught her father valuable lessons about belief, support, and the danger of imposing limitations on people's dreams. Robert's transformation taught Sarah about the possibility of forgiveness and second chances, even after deep hurt. Years later, when Sarah's agency had grown into one of the Southwest's premier creative firms, and she was speaking at conferences about entrepreneurship and following your passion, she would often tell the story of her father's change of heart. Not as a tale of vindication or revenge, but as an example of how people can grow, learn, and choose love over pride. Robert never missed another one of Sarah's professional milestones. He attended her agency's 5th anniversary celebration, proudly introduced himself to her employees as Sarah's dad, and even commissioned her to design promotional materials for his construction company. The man who had once called her a failure became her most enthusiastic supporter, proof that sometimes the people who hurt us most are capable of the most profound transformations. Sarah Martinez's story reminds us that success is not just about proving others wrong. It's about proving ourselves right. It's about having the courage to pursue our dreams even when the people we love most don't believe in them. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, our success can open the hearts and minds of those who doubted us, creating opportunities for healing, growth, and deeper love than we ever thought possible.